Hi there. Plugged on. It's Keith. It's Luke. And we have a ranking list. A little bit different. We've done Star Wars.
Yes.
And we've done a lot of music stuff in terms of ranking. But now we're going to do, well, right now we're doing books and we're going to do movies. Specifically, we're going to do the Harry Potter books. Which I didn't really plan this out, but then I have this Les Miserables shirt, which is a stupid pun, but I like it.
Yeah.
My Les Wiz shirt. But yeah, so for this video, we're gonna rank the Harry Potter books. Just because, I mean, we both like the movies and the books. I usually try to make it a point to read the books and watch the movies like once a year, just because it's my favorite fantasy series. I think even more so, even though I do really love The Dark Tower and I do really love Game of Thrones, I think nothing is going to come to, especially the sentimental value that Harry Potter has in a lot of ways. And the main reason this is going up like this is hopefully on the day this comes out, on September 1st this year, that's the date that the epilogue of the last book happens. The exact date.
Yes.
So
September 1st, 2017.
And so, if that is the case, currently I'm at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter because I planned that trip specifically for that reason, to be there. You know, I'm a dork. Because I'm a dork.
That's all right. Lauren and I went there. We bought wands.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to buy one. I'll probably take
her brother bought her robes.
But really quickly, just as a slight anecdote, we were like looking around and we were shopping, and Mom's like, "You want to get a Harry Potter shirt before you go?" It's like, I mean, I could. And she goes, "Do you want this shirt?" And I'm like, and it was a Hufflepuff t-shirt. I'm like, get that shit out of here.
Lauren's a Hufflepuff.
I'm a Slytherin, though. I ain't wearing no fucking puff
so
shirt.
So is her little brother.
I'm wearing no puff shirt. But, okay, back on track. So we're ranking the Harry Potter books. So we came together.
We're going to do the movies later. You can watch that.
Watch that. Hope that'll come up at some point, hopefully. Quick, I guess honorable mention, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Couple reasons that one's not here.
It's not really a book. It's more of script and stage directions for a play, because it is a play.
The plot's a little weak. I think I've read the whole thing, and the plot's a little weak. You can tell that they were like, hey, we're only doing one play. Okay, let's get everything we want to do. So time travel is a bit of a thing in there. So it's like, hey, after the books, check.
And it's always complicated when you involve time travel.
Oh yeah, during the books, check. Like when the night Harry's parents died, check. Alternate realities, double check. And so it's kind of it's okay, yeah. But it's not the story I don't think anybody wanted. I mean, also it's probably better to see the play.
Yeah.
To put it in perspective, I read that over 2 airplane flights that were about 7 or 8 hours. I read the whole thing.
Which
so it's
easy to do. It's really short.
It is really short. I mean, it's big and it's only 800 pages. But okay, so we're gonna get started on our list. So number 7, we have the first book.
Sorcerer's Stone / Philosopher's Stone, depending on the region you currently live in.
Which is basically either America or everywhere else.
Yeah.
For the most part. The first book, it's I mean, all of these books, I love all these books, and I don't think there's necessarily a bad book.
No.
It's just that
it's an origin story, and it falls into the origin story problem. Like a lot of origin story movies and things do. It's necessary, but not a whole lot of cool shit can happen yet.
It's a very slow start. My first time reading this, when these books came out, I couldn't get past the first chapter. I got bored to tears reading the first chapter. Because the first chapter is a great setup for everything that happens like after the fact. When I went back and read it, it was probably like 5-6 years before I actually read. Like, I think right before the 7th book came out was when I finally read the first book. Like, I'd seen the movie and I knew what happened, but like when I actually read it. And I think the other issue is it doesn't have the complexity. I said that really weird. The complexity that the other books have, because they're building off of the first book, whereas this one, there's some stuff that kind of becomes important later on, but it's like it's a little dry for a book.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. It is, again, like I said, it's kind of the foundation. It's necessary. It's not a bad book per se. It's just like it lacks the depth and subtlety that comes on later in the series.
Okay, number 6, we have Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. We have the second book. Again, a lot of the same sort of issues as the first book. It's early in the series, so again, the intricacies aren't there as much. I will give this book a little bit more credit, that there are some details that are hints towards. I mean, well, there's going to be spoilers in here because it's kind of hard to talk about these without spoilers. I mean, the fact that
the diary,
Harry being able to talk to snakes become big clues and plot points later in the book series, and so it's cool because they introduce that. But then at the same time, again, it still follows a lot of the same. Again, like I said, the same problems of the first book, where there's not as much interesting things happening.
Yeah, I will give it a tip of the cap to setting up future plot points with the diary and Tom Riddle being kind of a character per se.
Instead of just like a villain, he's a person. Like, not just like a villainous entity who flies around and lives on the back of people's heads. He was a person.
It kind of gave Voldemort a face because he really didn't have one yet. And you could kind of see that it was kind of really evil from... I wouldn't say evil, but twisted from the get-go.
Exactly. And
then... Maybe not twisted and very, very driven to power.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about this book, I feel, is rehashing stuff from the other book. From talking about the first book.
Yeah.
So... Number 5, we have Prisoner of Azkaban. It seems very thing. Well, so I wanted to wait till we get to this book to talk about this, because I think it's an issue with all 3 of the first books, in the sense that they're very standalone. In the sense that
they are very contained.
It's like, here's this adventure, it happens over this year, and then it's like, okay, maybe done. Some stuff applies later on, but it's not like... The book series could have ended after the 3rd book, and you know what? That would have been...
It's here, it happened, it's a wrap.
It's not really much building towards a greater story.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And then another one of my problems was the 3rd book was I only read half of the 3rd book the first time. Again, kind of a similar situation to the first book. It's just, for a bit of the 3rd book, not a lot happens. And from a young age, when I was like 10 or 11, maybe even like 9 when I read this book, and it's just like, eh. So it didn't grab me as much as, say, the 4th book did, which I read fairly quickly.
I did enjoy the 3rd book the most out of those kind of 3 standalone ones, mainly because it did such a great job towards the end of the book, using the red herring of Sirius Black as like the big bad for the book, sort of. Like, that idea I appreciate later on and understanding that now. The kind of twist at the end with Sirius really isn't the bad guy. He's been there the whole time, sort of thing. And setting up... It sort of did set up some future events.
But there's some minor things that it does set up, which I think it does set up less than the 2nd book, or at least the stuff that it does set up has less of an impact, but it does definitely set up some things, especially with the whole Wormtail owing Harry a life debt, which he cashes in on later in the series. Like, there's that, and then it's like foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the next book. But like,
and it is kind of the first hint at some of the greater things to come.
Yeah, definitely, definitely so.
Like the pawns are officially like in motion at this point.
You find out why, start to find out why Snape doesn't like Harry so much, which is probably one of the best done plot lines. The whole Snape and his relationship with Harry and his parents is probably one of the best drawn out plot lines of the entire story. And it kind of gets like its major start when we...
Later on, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So number 4, we have Goblet of Fire. This is kind of where, okay, things are now kind of really starting to move in the wizarding world in this big overall grand scheme, light versus dark battle thing we've got going on. But it also still kind of felt very small.
It starts to branch out, but it's still a very contained story in the sense that for the most part, a lot of the story was wrapped up in Goblet of Fire, but it did leave a lot open. I mean, the fact that, Voldemort wasn't defeated at the end of the book left it very much open, but still, like, the Triwizard Tournament's done. It's also the first, I think, book where it's kind of becomes apparent that this isn't a kids book series. I mean,
Yeah,
they talk
it
about
wasn't meant to
torture.
be a kids book series.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
like the first 3 books, you could kind of forgive somebody for thinking it, but then like they kill Cedric, and then there's
Yeah.
also a spell, the torture curse, which is designed to torture people. That's not very kid friendly.
And that's kind of why I put this book here, because it is like the start of that darker tone of books that I really kind of appreciated. The fact that she kind of went to these areas. She was willing to kill a character and say that she's not playing anymore.
Now, granted, Cedric was only really introduced in the 3rd book, so it's not the biggest. Like, it's not as big as later.
I think he was
deaths
really even
became.
only mentioned in the 3rd book.
Yeah, it's not as big of a thing that eventually happened, but I also think that this book, as you kind of said, opened up the world in the sense that there's not just Hogwarts.
Yeah.
Here's other characters whom have varying, like Victor Crumb and Fleur, who have varying degrees of importance later on in the series, and it kind of you find out about the Death Eaters, and it's like,
But also just opening up the world itself with like the Quidditch World Cup in the beginning.
Yeah, it's just like here, there's more to the Wizarding world than just this little section that you see with Harry and his friends, which I do appreciate. It's really cool, and I think that it's probably the first really, I would call maybe action-packed one. I mean, sure, the ending of the second one, fighting the Basilisk, is pretty good, but then I mean, like, you fight dragons. There's all kinds. You fight all kinds of creatures in the maze, and it's just like it seems, it's a little bit more of an action adventure kind of thing.
Definitely.
I lost my.
We're on number 3.
Number 3. Okay, number 3, Half-Blood Prince. I really like Half-Blood Prince as a book. It was the first Harry Potter book that clicked for me. I read this book in literally 2 days. It came out, and I did nothing but read it, and I finished it in 2 days, and I was just like, this book's great. Because it works really well book-wise. It's not as much happens, big story-wise, but there's a lot of plot development that happens.
Yeah.
You find out a lot about Voldemort's backstory, and a lot of stuff happens in terms of the characters' relationships, like, the first step towards Ron and Hermione kind of becoming a thing, and really the first time that Harry and Ginny kind of becomes a thing, and I mean, for the most part, where it's taken kind of seriously, and then dealing with the ramifications of Sirius's death in the previous book, and it gets really good. It's a slower book, but I feel like it did that well.
Yeah, it took me a while to really appreciate Half-Blood Prince for what it was. It's kind of, like you said, it's kind of slower plot-wise, but because it had so much development of character and fleshing out of some of the, to this point, minor characters in the series. Like, yes, Voldemort was the villain, but you really didn't know much about him. Like, you knew he was the bad guy, that was about it. Sort of looking into Snape's backstory was rather interesting, and kind of how it started off with Snape, right?
Yeah, it starts. He's in one of the first 2 chapters, because there's 2 chapters that aren't from Harry's perspective. There's one from the Prime Minister's perspective, and then one from I think it might be Snape's perspective, or he's definitely
kind
involved.
of a perspective of Snape and
then like Narcissa and Bellatrix. Yeah. The other thing is they humanize Malfoy, which is like surprising. Who's just a character you just designed and you've been
told to hate,
and now it's
same thing with Snape, and that's kind of like you
the
kind
brilliance of it.
Yeah, like you kind of realize like Snape kind of could potentially have a greater role to play yet.
I don't go as far as some people as to like, oh my god, to just fall in love with either of those characters because of the events of this book, but it does sympathize with them a little bit. Like there are people who go so far and they're like, and it's like how can you still hate Malfoy? It's like, because he was still a piece of shit in the other books.
He's still a slimy piece of shit.
It's and then
it was still very contained.
And it's still very contained, but I feel like this is really the only book in the series that kind of doesn't wrap itself up nicely.
Yeah,
because it's like it's definitely, this book definitely is it
was meant to lead
a precursor into Deathly Hallows.
Yeah, And I was gonna say, like, it is kind of, I think it's slow with the purpose of that final moment culminating in Dumbledore's death to really kick off the events of Deathly Hallows, for Harry to realize he's not coming back to the school. Like, he's got a job to do.
He's got to do it. He's not gonna have any help from Dumbledore anymore.
Yeah, he's on his own now. So that really kind of took me a while to appreciate this book.
It was just something clicked, and like I said, this was the first one. Whereas comparatively, if we moving on to number two, Order of the Phoenix, I hated that book at first. Mostly because I was forced to read it for like one of those school things. We had to read it, and so I'm like, and the second you tell me you have to do something, you have to do it in this kind of times, I don't want to do it, and I hate it. Also, it's the longest book, and again, I was like 12. No, I think even page length wise, I think Order of the Phoenix beats. I'm pretty sure by like 30 or 40 pages. Really? It does beat it out. It is the longest book, and it took me a long time to appreciate it, because when you look at it, this is the culmination of every book before it. You find out.
Well, then again, wouldn't that be the same for the previous books in the series?
Well, but I mean, like
But no, I get what you're saying though, in terms of like plot lines and overarching story. Yeah,
it's like boom, you find out why Voldemort's after Harry. Why not Harry's parents, Harry, because of this prophecy.
You also kind of really learn that it really wasn't fate; it was a choice that led to Harry, because it could have easily been one other person.
Neville could have easily been Neville,
who, believe it or not, the prophecy still technically could have been about, and we'll get to that later.
And technically, and some of them must have happened in the last book, and then there's other things. I mean, Sirius's death was like the biggest shocker, just because like Cedric was like, oh yeah, he was a character for this book and a little bit in the third book. But Sirius has been a big character for every book he's been in,
and you kind of like, you wanted Harry to have that little bit of happiness, that little bit of hope that, hey, maybe his life won't suck at some point. But no, he's not allowed to have that either, and that death hit me hard.
It was a big one, and it was just like,
because it really is the first like significant death
of quite a few over the next couple books.
Yeah,
there's a lot. But the other thing that I think this book does really well is a couple characters really shine. I think Hermione shines because, I mean, even though she wasn't adverse to like breaking the rules at this point, she's like all about it.
Yeah.
Because of Umbridge. It just has a lot of great characters. Umbridge is a great character.
God, finally a character we hated worse than Snape.
Yeah, she was terrible. It also did a fantastic job, which the last three books all do this, is a great job of humanizing Dumbledore.
Yes.
Because up until that point, he's like the wise old man who can't do anything wrong.
The sixth book did that the best, but yeah.
Sixth book did that really well. Seventh book did that really well, too. Especially the whole, like, just talking about his backstory.
Yeah.
Like, it just does a good, that he can make mistakes. And I think that was great. And I had another point and I had another big point we also find out why Harry has to go back to the terrible conditions of his aunt and uncle's house, which I found out later on that the alluded to abuse was supposed to be a lot more overt in the initial draft. Like, instead of like it just being like subtle things, like more emotional and whatnot, it was worse. Like physical, apparent. But then she's like, I'm gonna tone this down. I'm like, why? But whatever. Like, that would have really brought the story down. And I just think it's just the culmination of just a lot of good stuff. You know, again, Harry's connection to Voldemort's explored almost to its completeness. I mean, the last little puzzle pieces thrown in the last book, but like, there's just a lot of good stuff.
No, I mean, that's exactly why. I mean, I had Order of the Phoenix up so high. It is one of my favorite books. It's also one of my favorite movies, because it wraps up a lot of these loosely related plot lines and kind of brings everything together. And now it's like, okay,
the finish
this is the road to the final showdown. It starts here. Let's go. Hold on.
Also, quick side note before we move on to our last point. Introduces probably one of my favorite characters in Tonks. I love Tonks.
Yeah.
Tonks is my favorite. Like
this book was so good, and I feel like it's one of the more underappreciated of the books
because of its length and some people
Yeah.
like there's just so much unnecessary. It's like, but there's stuff.
But
It's
I
like
love the
here's
stuff
connecting
with Dumbledore's army and like the little side relationships and things like that.
and like the little nods, like when you find Lockhart in St. Mungo's, and it's like,
yeah,
what happened to you? And it's like that's cool. And you find out about Neville's parents, like what state that they're in, and it's like,
yeah.
oh.
Like you knew Neville lived with his grandmother, you didn't know why,
And you find out that something happened to his parents in like the third or fourth book, and then it's like, oh, that's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Crap. All right, number 1, as you could probably guess,
since if you've been paying attention and counting,
it's Deathly Hallows. It's
Yeah.
the last book, for a lot of the same reasons. This one just culminated in bringing together so much stuff. I mean, like all of the storylines get wrapped up pretty well. I mean, the books aren't perfect, and there are some
No.
things that make no sense, and I'll be the first person to admit that there's, a lot of stuff that does not make sense, even in this book. Even though this book was, I think I had this book at like number 1. I think my only problem with this book was there was a lot of things that were introduced in this book that became important for this book, and I'm like, I get why you have to do that, but it's like,
yeah,
but so certain things like finding out Harry was a Horcrux is like a big thing, even though I saw that one coming because I'm like, oh yeah, like you're introducing this thing, and and it kind of made a lot of sense. And
so it makes me wonder with that, like Harry being a Horcrux. Is Voldemort able to destroy one of his own Horcruxes?
I mean, that's the whole thing with how he comes back, is that they think Voldemort has to do it. I think he can, but it's just like, first off, if he knows about it, why would he?
Yeah.
And then 2, it's like that was the only way that he could survive.
But like, even if Harry had changed? Well, Harry did change wands, so it wasn't. Yeah.
It wasn't the wand. It was
Harry himself.
It was the fact that when Voldemort took his blood,
Yeah.
and then that brought his mother's protection. So as long as Voldemort was alive, it kind of just made it the perfect situation so that Harry could live. And that was like another thing. There's so many little nods in the books. Like when you read the 4th book again after you read the last book, and you see like when Harry's describing the ritual that brings Voldemort back, and he says Dumbledore like has like a look of triumph for a second, and then it goes away, and then Harry just kind of brushes it off like whatever. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, he's been planning this all along. And again, there's the stuff with Dumbledore's backstory, which is really cool, and you really get to explore Harry, Ron, and Hermione's relationship in this book, and I think that's the best part, because even though like it gets explored on every book,
They've always been friends. I mean, there was some some pissing matches between Ron and Harry at certain points throughout the books,
and a lot of pissing matches between Ron and Hermione in the book. Like I think there's seriously only 2 books where they don't have a major fight, and that's the 2nd and 5th books. Every other book, there's a major fight between them.
But yeah, really getting into and exploring the relationship between the 3 of them, I appreciated a lot in this book. This is the book that really changed my mind about Snape as a character.
Oh yeah,
because up until this point, Snape was just, you knew he was a member of the Order. You knew he was somehow technically a good guy, but you didn't know why.
Or it's like, just like, oh man, he killed Dumbledore, and it's like this thing, but it's like, oh, he was on our side all along.
But also, like, knowing that the Defense Against the Dark Art teacher's position is cursed, Snape wasn't going to hold it anyway. Dumbledore was going to die anyway. It had to be Snape, so it made sense in the end.
There's a lot of good stuff like that, and there's a lot of like symbolism. Dobby dying is one.
First off, hold on. The one that probably hit the hardest was Hedwig.
Hedwig sucked, man.
Like that,
that was the worst.
And she didn't hold off on because she knew people were gonna die. She even said people were gonna die in this book. Important people were gonna die, and a lot of them were gonna die.
Like
we knew that coming in, but she did not hesitate to start throwing the gut punches. Like Hedwig
in like the 3rd chapter.
Yeah. Really, the 1st chapter really dealing with Harry.
Yeah, and then Remus and Tonks die, leaving their son in the same situation that Harry was, and it's like, the feels.
Yeah, and Which
Fred.
Which Weasley?
Fred dies.
Didn't Percy? No,
Percy doesn't
lived.
die. Percy lives through it.
Bill? George?
No, it's the only Weasley that died was Fred.
I thought another
Bill
one
got
did.
like attacked by Greyback
Bill got
in the sixth
bitten.
book.
Yes.
We didn't get well.
No,
he
he
didn't.
got
He
bit.
didn't turn into a werewolf.
Yeah.
He got bit, and then there's a lot of stuff like that, and it was really. It's a really well done book, and it kind of like like we were saying, Neville, kills the last Horcrux with the sword of Gryffindor, which is like, yeah.
So technically, he was the one to vanquish the Dark Lord, sort of.
Sort of. He did. He vanquished part of it.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think was a major mistake with this book, or one of them, if I already said that already, was I get some of it, but I don't know if having Mrs. Weasley kill Bellatrix was the best way. I would have had Neville do it. I mean, he needs it. I mean,
yeah, no,
in a lot of ways.
But also, it didn't make sense for Neville to kill anyone because
in some ways
he ended up being the one that made it possible for Harry to kill Voldemort.
Yeah, so it's just a great culmination to a great series, and it's just it's the best.
And it wrapped everything up. The epilogue just kind of tied everything up in a nice, neat little bow, and it should have been left that way.
I'm of two minds with the epilogue. The epilogue's nice because it's like, oh, they live happily ever after, but then at the same time, it's like you're tying it up way too nicely, to the point where like they tied it up so nicely that like I think that's part of the reason why Cursed Child kind of isn't the best story wise, is because it's like we need to come up with a way for there to be more story.
Now, granted, they
go out of
jumped
the way.
how many years into the future?
It's the epilogue's 19 years later, and then
so I mean, they really, if they wanted to do something after the seventh book, they could have covered anywhere in that 19 years. Because anytime you have someone like Voldemort, who is this charismatic, in his own way, cult leader, he's gonna have fanatic followers. What happened to all of them? We find out nothing about that. What about the Fenrir Greybacks and the? I mean, obviously, like Lucius Malfoy, like
he gets off scot-free,
Yeah.
kind of. What happens to like Dolohov? Actually, no, he got captured, if I remember correctly. But like but I get what you're saying. Like all
like
these
what
people,
happened to all like the rest of the cult? Because I guarantee they didn't stop.
Yeah, it's like, that would have been nice. I get like that, like it's the Harry Potter is a story of Harry and Voldemort, and so then it's like whatever, but. Yeah,
it was done.
That's like my only thing is that, like they could have done an epilogue a little bit better, or she could have. But the J.K. Rowling's, like, again, probably up there one of my favorite authors. What she did, she created a world that people can't get enough of. I mean, heck, they're doing more movies. They have 2 theme parks.
Yeah, one
and it's
in
like,
Orlando, one in Anaheim.
I think it's in L.A. Or it's Hollywood. It's in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So it's just like. Like I said, it's my favorite. So so this was us coming up with a ranking of the books.
Stay tuned for movies.
We'll do movies here, and then thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all that stuff, and see ya.